Being able to get BIS items in WoW has been a common characteristic and a common goal for players for basically as long as the game has existed. Trying to grind or acquire, old legendary items from back in like Vanilla or Burning Crusade, that was one of the biggest ways that you could become BIS. In addition to that, there was, like pre-raid BIS, and then there was like specific tier BIS and stuff like that. Now, best in slot gear has kind of evolved to the point where you're not always going to be wearing the same pieces as other players. That's generally due to like item variance with M+, that's due to item variance with the Great Vault. But even still, as the game has evolved in that aspect of it as well, players' expectations for being able to acquire some of the best loot, especially in slots such as like weapons and trinkets, has progressed as well. Players are seeking an avenue for just being able to acquire the best loot in a more timely manner, as opposed to either needing to grind it out or in some situations just kind of high roll having the best items. And so let's talk about deterministic loot today. As I've seen a couple of conversations about deterministic loot popping up over the past couple of weeks, I think the most popular one was this Ellesmere tweet where he stated that all end-game PvE trinkets should be purchasable with a PvE currency like the Fated system had, especially with these old dungeons in rotation that had massive loot tables and only 2 pieces dropping per run. Farming some of these trinkets can be so awful. So for those who don't know, let's talk about a little bit what he's referencing. So with Season 4, there was a dinar system, and that was the name of the system. And after it was 30, then 20, then 10 Fated boss kills, you got a Puzzling Cartel dinar. Then once you got the Puzzling Cartel dinar, you were able to take it to a vendor and purchase between trinkets and weapons. And then there were some very specific items. There were like rings from Anduin and other specific special effects items that were also added to the dinar vendor. But in general, it was trinkets and weapons that were on this vendor. And so after, your first 30 kills of Fated bosses, you were able to acquire one piece of gear and have it be this exactly what you want. And that's basically how it went. And so then you would have people recommending the exact BIS items that you should purchase and in what order you should likely be purchasing these items from the dinar vendor. So this was a way of getting deterministic loot. This was not present for M+, but Ellesmere does cite M+ as something that should also be affected by this. And so I kind of want to give my thoughts and opinions on deterministic loot and kind of talk about the pros and the cons of this, because I'm actually kind of somewhere in the middle on this whole entire situation. So first off, the pros of deterministic loot. It allows Blizzard to continue to create cool items like this. So for Evokers this tier, this isn't a very rare item, but I'm going to talk about very rare items in just a second. This isn't a very rare item, but this weapon here, Carnalex, drops off of Broodkeeper. And basically, it is this and Nelthorak's Enemy of the Sky, which is the bow that drops off Razageth for hunters, takes their class from one that, for Hunter, it takes their class from one that is slightly below average to one that is one of the best single target DPS in the game, and it's not particularly close. For Devastation Evoker, it takes their class from not that great to pretty good. And then for Preservation, it takes them from, it's one of the best healers, but then it takes them to also being one of the best DPS healers at the same point. And so these items are incredibly polarizing. It was more of my point. And they're polarizing to the point where not having them is a massive error. And that creates a situation where you're going to feel like you're doing significantly less damage. And I've talked about this in the past where it was like, I think this relates more so with Tyr and the Catalyst. You run into a situation of like, why even try, why even play if I don't have the absolute best gear? And I think that's just like how gaming has evolved over time, where if you don't have access or the ability to be able to get the best gear in some capacity, then there's a situation where it's like, oh yeah, why should I even try? And I think that World of Warcraft and MMOs and stuff like that used to not be like that, and there was more of a I'm fine with only having this level of gear. But as the game and as gaming just in general has evolved, that's been less and less okay. So that's basically the downside of not having it, is because one, the classes are going to be just imbalanced inherently, and it also kind of limits Blizzard's creativity of being able to make stuff like this, because these items are cool, but if players aren't really able to easily get them, then that sucks. I mean, I don't think that that's like a great solution. So on one hand, it does allow Blizzard to continue to create. I mean, I would describe this bow whenever I got on my hunter. I think this is really cool. I think this is a super sick item, and I don't mind that. I don't mind that it dropped off Razageth. I do mind that the acquisition process is tough, and I mean, acquisition has always been one of the hardest parts for Blizzard. Now, I think let's talk about very rare items for a second before we talk about M+. I think that very rare items are also kind of cool. So if we let me just show you guys in game. If we go into game and go into the Dragonflight raid, Vault of the Incarnates, you can see that, you know, there are some bosses that drop these items that are tagged as very rare, and they have a lower drop rate than other items. And if you scroll through, you know, a guide on any website, if you scroll through a guide on Wowhead or whatever, you'll see, then you're looking at gear, pretty much everybody universally has Whispering Incarnate icon listed as one of their best in slot trinkets. In addition to that, there's also 2 rings from the raid. Both of them are also very rare, and both of them proc special secondary effects off of fire damage, which means that like pretty much most players want them because there are not very many rings from the raid. But also, in addition to that, people who do fire damage in any capacity also want them on top of that. So we're in a situation where pretty much every spec has this Whispering Incarnate icon listed as one of their BIS items, and then I would also go out on a limb and say pretty much every spec has at least one of the Aeronog ring or the Broodkeeper Diana ring listed as a BIS item as well. And so that's definitely going to hold players back. And so then there's a question of like, should there be items that have a lower drop chance that all 20 players in your raid are looking for? That kind of feels wrong, right? So I think that feels wrong in some avenues, in the sense of it's going to be tough to fulfill the ability to be able to get all of the players that loot. And in addition to that, some people, especially with how group loot has worked itself out, just are never going to be getting these pieces, right? Because if you're in a specific guild group, all right, say you're a healer or the other tank, the only way that you're getting this is if you're looted the first copy of the Whispering Incarnate icon to your role. If you're somebody who's a little bit lower loot priority. In addition to that, if you're just like a DPS that's a little bit lower loot priority, say you're not in on every progression boss, the opportunity for you to get a Whispering Incarnate icon, you better just hope that you get it out of your Great Vault. We've been pretty unlucky with Whispering Incarnate icons in our raid. We don't get that many that drop during raid, and so a lot of our players are still missing it, and a currency would actually be pretty solid for that. Now, where do I want to segue next? I think I'll talk about M+. I think that M+ is a weird one because these things are already farmable from M+, and I don't think that like a currency where you should be able to purchase items should necessarily involve M+. And I say that in the sense of like, I don't think the issues from M+ gearing are inherently that we need a deterministic loot system, because the gear is already farmable if you put enough time in. Now, it doesn't feel super fair in some aspects because let's say on average you're going to have to spend, you know, if you're just farming an item by yourself, I think the numbers for Whetstone, Windscar Whetstone, were on average 45 runs before you can get a Windscar Whetstone. Obviously, some people are going to be above that, some people are going to be below that, but the numbers on average are going to be around 45 runs. Now, that seems wrong, right? Because then if you're running in a 5-stack that will trade you the Windscar Whetstone, you're going to get that on average in like, you know, like 8 runs or something like that. Whereas... And this is because, you know, and I have raid bots up because I feel like raid bots has a better loot table than in-game, because in-game's loot table is kind of bricked. There's 15 items from Court of Stars, whereas if you go and you click on Shadow Moon Burial Grounds, what is this, like 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, 7 items versus 15. So the loot table is almost effectively halved. Dude, this is just so many items from Court of Stars. And then if I click on Halls of Valor, I got stuck in farming Halls of Valor as well. This thing had like 20 items that I could loot. This felt ridiculous, and I think that Blizzard, especially whenever they're bringing these new dungeons or these old dungeons forward, needs to make sure that they're really fixing the loot table. Now, my thoughts on generally deterministic loot are, I kind of talked about why it would be a good thing. Now, I do think that it kind of takes away some of the elements of just like an MMORPG as a whole. And I think that there is some level of, grinding loot that is fine, and we can grind loot from M+. I do think that the issue, at least with me, for deterministic loot comes with the very rare items, especially since all 20 players in your raid want these very rare items. And there are other items that aren't even tagged as very rare. So you actually don't have a lower percent drop chance on them, but they're still items that you want on your most of your raid. So like Manic Grief Torch is a good item for DPS, melee DPS specifically. You have Broodkeeper's Promise, which pretty much every single healer wants, and so you want all of these items as well. And the only way of really getting them is hoping that they drop in your raid. Now that definitely does feel wrong. But I don't think that deterministic loot and being able to purchase it off of a vendor is specifically the best way of doing it. And I think the best way of doing it probably would be through like a Great Vault style system, where I think that being able to lock your vault, it could be a good solution, where if you have like multiple upgrades in your vault, you could lock it for multiple weeks in a row and just select multiple things. That seems like that could be a potential solution. That way you don't have to necessarily make the incredibly tough decisions of, oh, am I taking Groove Torch this week, or am I taking Incarnate Icon? On top of that, there could be, if they are going to add a currency, the currency could come from the vault as well. There could be something that's added to the vendor. So whenever you get like sockets off of the vendor, I think that there could be a vendor currency that, if you have to take sockets 4 times in a row or something like that, you're able to then, go to this token exchange guy and then purchase an item off of that. Because right now we have Bottled Essence, and that's for 3 vaults in a row. You're able to craft a 418 piece of like your own stats that you want. And I think that there is a world where we could do, also 4 weeks in a row or something like that of taking sockets, where you're able to purchase an item from the raid. I don't necessarily think it should be from M+. I think that already has a grindable nature to it. I think that overall we start to get into slippery territory whenever you are purchasing loot straight up, to the point where it becomes a problem, because the game is designed in a way where not everybody is going to be best in slot in every single situation. Everybody's gear is going to be a little bit different. Now, for some players, that definitely hits you into a point of like, oh, why should I even try? It's cool that Blizzard is designing items that are, multiple percent DPS increases, or multiple percent throughput healing increases, or multiple percent survivability increases. But whenever the accessibility of these items is low, that also makes it kind of unfun, because then that means that item is mandatory. And we kind of see the same thing with tier, where the accessibility of tier is low for non-raiders, outside of waiting for the catalyst. And so at that point it becomes problematic, because then players hit the threshold of, oh, should I even try to do M+ until I get the catalyst unlocked? Should I even try to zone into PvP before I get the catalyst unlocked? So I do think that there's merit to both sides of the argument. I generally do think that it's a bit more dangerous to just add a straight up dinar system, and I would be interested in exploring a new option for deterministic loot just in World of Warcraft. Overall, what are you guys' thoughts? Do you think that the deterministic loot would kind of ruin the way the game is being played? Do you think that deterministic loot is just an evolution and somewhere that we kind of need to go with the state of the game? I'm really interested in hearing your thoughts in the comment section down below, and I will see you guys in the next video. Make sure you like, comment, and subscribe, and yeah, I'll see you guys later. Goodbye.